listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Keri Roberts, and my guest today is Tony Celeste, the Executive Director and General Manager at Ingram Micro. Welcome, Tony. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, thank you, Keri. Pleasure to be here.
We are chatting today about the Fed buying season. And for those that don't know, can you tell us what it is, when is it, and why it's so important?
Sure. Well, the federal buying season is July through September 30th, the last day of the government fiscal year. But in reality, the Fed buying season is all fiscal year long, but it typically culminates in the last three months of the government year. During this time, we can see anywhere from 40 to as much as 50% of the IT spend take place. So that's one of the reasons why it's pretty significant. This time of year is also referred to as the busy season, right? And it is because the government is buying all year long. It's just they tend to buy a lot more in these last 3 months because they've got to spend that money or lose that money before the end of the fiscal year. So that September 30th deadline is really key. The other thing that we see a lot more of is a lot more, besides the requests for quotes, you see a lot more going on in terms of requests for proposal, contract awards for future opportunities as well. So this tends to be just a really busy time of year, and that's why it's so important.
Now, the public sector does actually have two buying seasons. It has the Fed, which we just spoke about, but it also has the Sled. What is the difference between these two?
Yeah, so the Sled busy season or buying season tends to be a little shorter, but it typically begins as early as April and ends around June. It maps to the school, just before the school year end, and the summer vacation months really kick into high gear. The biggest difference really is the geographic diversity of the partners that are participating and the contracting vehicles being used by state and local governments as well as education institutions in terms of the acquisition. The other important thing is the partners do tend to be geographically located in the communities that they serve. So as you might imagine, and then the contracting vehicles are some of the popular ones are the NASPO contract, the National Association of State Procurement Officials, now called Value Point, and then NCPA, the National Cooperative Purchase Alliance, and then there are some other state contracts as well. So that's the big difference between the two seasons.
Now, I want to talk about what's currently happening in the public sector. Are there any market trends that you're seeing right now?
Oh boy, yeah. There's a lot happening in public sector, and there typically always is. I would say the biggest trend we see in public sector is the market always doesn't move as fast as we would like to see it move. The wheels of government in general move slow, but they can be impacted by many factors. And some of the factors that we've seen are impacting them right now are, the politics, pandemic, social unrest. There's a whole bunch of different trends. But if I focus mostly on federal trends, although many of them you see translate into state and local government as well, we're seeing things like contract consolidation. So under the direction of the Office of Management and Budget, we're seeing a push to use best-in-class contracts, more consolidation. We're seeing a big need for IT modernization. We've seen acts like the IT Modernization Fund, FITARA, which is the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, that's reshaping how they're acquiring technology in their need to digitally transform. From a technological standpoint, we're seeing big push for cloud as a service, increased cybersecurity, just as a few examples. And then, of course, we're seeing a big push for things like telework, work from home, distance learning. And then lastly, big data analytics, machine learning, and AI are all big areas.
So you were talking about best-in-class contracts. What are those, and why is there this big push to consolidate everything?
Well, the government's looking at economies of scale and efficiency. They're looking to get the best value. And when they have contract vehicles that are already in place that can be used, they're directing agencies to use those vehicles. So an example of that would be out of NASA, the NASA SOUP contract, the SOUP 5 contract out of Health and Human Services, administered out of NIH is the NITAC contracts out of their IT acquisition center of excellence. And they're driving people towards contract vehicles like CIO-CS, their commercial solutions contract.
Now, let's talk about the CARES Act for a moment as well. And I just want to read out what that includes. When it comes to the state, local, and tribal governments, the CARES Act requires that the payments from the Coronavirus Relief Fund only be used to cover expenses that, one, are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to coronavirus. Number two, were not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, 2020 for the state or the government. And number three, were incurred during the period that begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends on December 30th, 2020. So what opportunities are available for partners that fit into these three requirements that maybe they haven't thought of yet?
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities. And first and foremost, it's important to keep in mind the Fed is printing money right now. They're pouring stimulus into the system. There's a lot of politics involved, but in general, what these rules were put in place because they don't want groups misusing these funds to bail out poorly run state and local government deficits. They want it used to help citizens and to improve the immediate situation. That being said, there is a lot that I would suggest that state and local governments could get a 2-for-1 benefit with technology solutions. Use once and reuse many times. So most technology infrastructure or solutions that could be purchased using this money would fit the bill of hitting all of those categories. The key might be in how you do and use those monies. So for example, as a service, subscription, or cloud, you'd only be able to leverage those funds within that period of time. But if you were doing capital purchases and say acquiring a bunch of tablets or a bunch of laptops or infrastructure in your data center that you needed to support the CARES Act and its increased move to telework or distance learning in this period of time, you would later be able to reuse and continue to use that technology as time went on. Whereas if you just ran to the cloud to say, get those services, once that period of time was up, you then still have to find funds to utilize, to continue to utilize those services in the cloud. So I think that's one of the real keys to this funds and taking advantage of it. The other thing to keep in mind is just how much money they've put out there. $2.2 trillion in stimulus, as mentioned, the Fed printing the money, but $150 billion for state and local tribal governments, $30 billion for education stabilization, $45 billion for state and local and education institutions disaster relief that they can apply for, $4.3 billion for public health agencies, $25 billion for transit systems, and now they're talking about trying to put another $3 billion into IT modernization and possibly another $4 for the E-rate program for K through 12 and education institutions to better enable distance learning and that Wi-Fi capabilities.
Who is the person or the groups of people that are making the decisions on what types of things that they should be using and buying with this money they've been given?
Well, I mean, it's the acquisition officials. It's in the state and local government. It's going to be, your governors and state and local legislative teams. It's going to be the chief technology officers and the chief information officers. And then in the federal side, it's going to be the heads of agencies. It's going to be their chief information and chief technology officers are all going to play a role in what the priorities need to be to deliver on the mission.
Now, you were mentioning earlier, of course, this Fed buying season is looking very different this year with the pandemic and it being an election year as well. How does this affect the buying season with these two issues?
Candidly, environmental and external factors always impact the federal government busy season. It's really more of a distraction than anything else. Election years, happen. Second term, presidential election when they're going for their second term is typically more business as usual, as the incumbent typically expected to remain in place versus when an 8-year term is up and they're looking at an administration change. So there is usually an expectation that they'll spend every dollar they possibly can and then some to leave that legacy behind. And when they're competing for that second term, they tend to be a little more conservative because they want to appear thrifty. Now, this situation has been complicated this year with the pandemic and then some other, distractions with some social unrest that are impacting work schedules. And so the federal workforce, as a result, has been impacted. They're working shift schedules. They're not in the offices as much. So requisitions getting to the acquisition shops were somewhat delayed. And now the acquisition shops are expected to handle this huge amount of volume in the remaining 2 months of the government fiscal year. So clearly, this is, the telework and the mobility issues has delayed things. And now what we're seeing is a real taxing of the acquisition workforce to move these, the high volumes that everybody's expecting to see. So if I was to predict, I think what we're going to see is average deal sizes increase dramatically. We could also see that this will tend to favor large incumbents in some ways. And it's going to be important for organizations to staff up right now, be ready to respond, and be ready to respond quickly as the acquisition workforce has really had their cycle compressed.
Now, you were mentioning earlier, IT infrastructure, the cloud, those are things that we're seeing a lot more of. Are you seeing any other technological solutions that are in high demand for this buying season and any new requirements that are coming to market this year?
Sure. We're seeing technology solutions that are in higher demand will continue in general for the foreseeable future. So if you really think about it, all of the technology that people need to work from home, to service citizens, to protect the first responders, to protect our warfighters, achieve better health outcomes for our veterans, or even our citizens for that matter, technology is going to play a role. And so for the foreseeable future, we see the ramp up in all technologies continuing. So first it was all about mobility, but now, they're looking at secondary. Okay, now we need more security. We need more network bandwidth. We need backup and recovery to ensure resiliency. We need therefore more in the data center. We need more cloud. So we're going to see most of these solutions I think, continue for the foreseeable future for quite some time. There's also been a recognition as a result of this that the government in general and education institutions need to digitally transform, and they need to accelerate that adoption. And the rationale behind that is just quite simply that they weren't ready for this. I mean, they weren't expecting this to occur as quickly as it did. Everybody saw it coming, but they thought the progress to getting there would be much slower than what we've seen. And as for new requirements in the federal, which are going to likely cascade into other areas as well, we're seeing a big push for Buy American, Trade Agreement Act compliance, increased information security, right? InfoSec plans. We're seeing more need for identity management, multi-factor authentication. We're going to see the incorporation when we think about things like AI and machine learning for telemetry. That's also about being able to understand the location from where an individual whose identity you validated is accessing the information. Are they accessing information in a location you want them to be accessing? So working from home versus, say, working in a Starbucks or working somewhere where you probably wouldn't want them accessing sensitive information. We'll see more requirements around supply chain risk management. We're going to see the need for controlled unclassified information to be protected. We've seen that standard articulated in NIST 800-171, and that's going to manifest itself in something called CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification, where as opposed to self-certifying now, you're going to have to be audited by an independent third party that's going to certify your environment as being compliant. So a lot more requirements coming down the road, even to the point of what type of equipment you're employing in your own network. So there are concerns right now about Huawei and ZTE Corporation embedding certain technologies in the telecommunications and video world that are problematic from a security standpoint. So a lot more in terms of requirements coming down the pike, and a lot more in terms of IT solution spend for the foreseeable future.
And Tony, you recently moved to this division within Ingram Micro in November, and you've been working hard to make changes and advance this vertical. What is your vision and goal for the public sector as we move into 2021?
It's all about creating value, and value can't just be lowest price. Price is important, will always be, but if that's all we rely on, we're in trouble. And not just us, our vendors, our partners, and the public sector end users. Lowest price is not the answer. It doesn't necessarily bring you the innovation you need. It doesn't bring you the real value that you're looking for. So ultimately, it's about creating value for the end user. That's where it all begins, enabling the mission of government, accelerating digital transformation, improving citizen services. Probably going to repeat myself a little bit here, but it is about protecting our first responders and our warfighters, better health outcomes for our veterans, better tools for educators, improving learning outcomes, improving those health outcomes, improving citizen services, providing access. So we built a plan and are aligning all of our resources to improve our focus on that public sector market. That plan focuses in 4 areas. First and foremost, it's end user insight. It's about expanding the solutions tailored for this marketplace. It's about enabling those partners to participate. And it's about putting in place a set of go-to-market strategies that create value for the end user and everyone in the supply chain, all the way back to the vendors that are innovating in technology.
Now, we're talking there's so many changes going on here. There's a lot of things to be aware of. You're talking about how competitive this market is, especially now. What does it take for channel partners, providers, and manufacturers to be successful at this time?
Candidly, it takes commitment. Most of all, you have to be committed to this marketplace. You need to care about your customer's mission. You need to understand the mission of government, and you need to be able to link your technology solution to mission outcome. You can't be fair weather about this market. And many companies and partners are. It's complicated, it's complex, it's hard. It's not for the faint of heart. And so in good times, when the economy's great and things are bustling and everybody's doing good, people don't pay attention to it. When things tighten up, they still spend, good times and in bad. And in bad times, they tend to spend more. And so people run back to this market. So they're in and they're out. The public sector marketplace, they remember it. So they're looking for people who first and foremost are committed. Secondly, you have to have that subject matter expertise. You have to be able to tailor those solutions to meet the unique needs and challenges of this marketplace. That means you have to understand the certifications that are involved. We talked a little bit, if it's cloud, it's the FedRAMP certification. Those are the security certifications that have to be in place for the cloud to be implemented securely. It's understanding the Federal Information Processing Standards. It's complying with the National Institutes of Standards and Technology security framework and things like FISMA. It's understanding the acquisition regulations and why the government wants to compete those bids, and the importance of getting innovation and innovative solutions in government. And then, participate in the many organizations that influence this market. And there's a lot of them to participate to increase that understanding, whether it be AFCEA, the Armed Forces and Communications Electronics Association, or organizations like ACT-IAC, the American Council on Technology and the Industry Advisory Council, just to name a couple of them.
Let's talk a little bit about Ingram Micro specifically. We know and we hear on this show all the time, Ingram is constantly helping its partners in a variety of ways. And Ingram is involved with 15% of annual U.S. public sector sales. How else is Ingram helping to navigate through all of these changes that are happening?
Yeah, well, I do want to qualify that. If you look at Ingram Micro, Ingram is the world's largest information technology distributor and technology aggregator. And we have a wealth of resources to bring to the table. I mean, we do, on average, over 50 billion a year in terms of revenue globally. And that's a lot of business. And then when you break that down, the public sector business inside Ingram is 15% of our annual revenues in the U.S. And so we have a lot that we can bring to the table. So, for example, cloud and managed services is an area of strength for us. I think we have somewhere where we're managing today over 5 million active seats in the Ingram Micro Cloud Marketplace. If you look at the number of vendors we support, somewhere along the lines of over 1,700. We've got over 200,000 customers in the marketplace. In the public sector arena, just in the U.S. public sector, we enable in excess of 7,500 partners who are transacting business with us in the space today. And so we have cloud and managed services. We have IT asset disposition and full life cycle management services. We have our solutions financing organization, and we can do as a service, professional services, cloud, subscription. monthly recurring billing, consolidation of complex financing from rentals to traditional leasing to subscription. We've got a security practice that follows the NIST framework. We've got market and business intelligence services, our integration capabilities through our vast supply chain. We've got 198 logistics centers worldwide, over 20 million square feet. I mean, it's just amazing how much we can bring to the table. And then in the public sector arena, we've also got the bid and proposal support and that understanding of this unique marketplace and what it takes to win.
I mean, we talk on this show, like I said, Ingram offers so much. I love that you broke that down even more for people that don't know. You had answered this a little bit earlier, but we ask all of our guests on this show, where do you see technology going within the next year?
Wow. We see technology demands continuing to accelerate. Organizations will need to digitally transform because if they don't, they will likely not survive. Even the service economy will change to improve their user experience and digitally transform. I mean, look at a great example is just the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's probably that one place where nobody wants to go, right? Everybody's always heard the horror stories about going to MVA and waiting in line and what you need to do. One of the things that's happened is more services have been made available online more rapidly. And then they've gone, because of the pandemic, to where they're allowing people to schedule and make appointment times, and people are moving in and out more efficiently. So it's improving the services. People are going for other types of services now too, and they're going by appointment and they're scheduling things and they're taking advantage of technology and applications to do that. And so even the traditional service economies that have not been big users of technology are going to start using more technology in the future. So AI, machine learning are going to be big areas, big data analytics. We're going to see increased cybersecurity, increased mobility, and more demand for subscription and as a service.
Yeah, I agree. I think you made a good point. You know, despite all the not so great things that happened during the pandemic, it did push a lot of agencies to really start using technology and making experiences better, which we hope does continue. So I love that you're bringing that to light here. If people want to learn more about anything we talked about, or they want to connect with you to ask questions, where is the best place to do that?
Well, first and foremost, I tell them, go to our imaginenext.ingrammicro.com public sector website. So imaginenext, ingrammicro.com public sector. You're going to find a bunch of information there. You can always contact your Ingram Micro sales executive. If you don't know who they are, you're more than welcome to email us at publicsectorsales@ingrammicro.com. You can reach me. You can email me, Tony Celeste, tony.celeste@ingrammicro.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Tony Celeste, or on Twitter @tceleste2014.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for really breaking down something that can seem pretty daunting during this time. We greatly appreciate you being here with us, Tony.
Thank you, Keri. I really enjoyed it.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter @Ingram TechSoul with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.